The crystal wastes stretched endlessly under 3 pale moons, a landscape where forgotten magic came to die. Among the shattered towers and frost-covered ruins, sound barely louder than breathing echoed through the Temple of Echoes. It was the sound of hope trying not to give up. Vesper lay curled beneath a collapsed archway, his midnight blue scales dulled by weeks of neglect. Once, he had been magnificent. A shadow dragon with wings that could slice through moonbeams and eyes that held the depth of twilight itself. Now, his wings were folded tight against his body, one torn membrane held together by nothing but stubborn will. The chain around his neck was made of celestial iron, the kind that burned cold instead of hot. Leaving silver scars where it touched his scales, he had been left here by dragon tamers who deemed him worthless. Too gentle for war, too wild for shows, too different for acceptance. His shadow-born magic, which should have made him valuable, instead made others afraid. So they had abandoned him in this place where magic went silent, hoping he would fade away like a bad dream. Rosalie had not meant to find the temple. She had been following a constellation that existed only in her grandmother's stories, the kind of stars that moved when you needed them most. Her silver hair caught the moonlight as she climbed through a gap in the temple wall, her worn traveler's cloak catching on ancient stones. She was 17, old enough to know danger, young enough to walk toward it anyway. The first thing she noticed was the cold. Not winter cold, but the cold of loneliness so deep it had become physical. The second thing was the breathing. Soft, measured, the sound of something trying very hard to stay alive. She found him in the shadows, and for a moment she thought he was part of the darkness itself. Then his eyes opened. They were violet, streaked with silver, like storm clouds trying to remember lightning. Those eyes held no threat, only a question that had been asked too many times with no answer. Why are you here? Rosalie moved closer, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every story she had ever heard told her to run. Dragons were dangerous, unpredictable, creatures of raw power and ancient rage. But this dragon looked at her the way drowning things look at shore. She noticed the chain first. How it had rubbed the scales beneath raw and weeping. She saw the torn wing, the way he held himself so still because movement meant pain. She saw the emptiness of the space around him. No water, no food. Nothing but stone and abandonment. Without thinking, she reached into her pack and pulled out her water flask. Her hands shook as she approached, but she did not stop. Vesper watched her with those impossible eyes, too tired to be wary, too lonely to turn away kindness, even if it was a trap. She poured water into her cupped palm and held it out to him. For a long moment, nothing happened. The world held its breath. Then, slowly, carefully, as if afraid of breaking something precious, Vesper lowered his head and drank. The water was ordinary, pulled from a stream that morning. But in that moment, it tasted like the first rain after endless drought. His throat, dry as ancient paper, remembered what relief felt like. When the water was gone, he lifted his head and did something he had not done in weeks. He made a sound. Not a roar, not a growl, but a low musical note that resonated in the hollow places of the temple. It was the sound of gratitude in a language older than words. Rosalie smiled. It transformed her face from merely pretty to luminous. She sat down on the cold stone floor, cross-legged, as if settling in for a long conversation. From her pack, she pulled out dried meat, hard cheese, and bread wrapped in cloth. She broke the bread in half and offered it to him. Vesper had not eaten anything but rainwater in his own pride for too long. The bread was simple, probably stale, but when he took it gently from her hand, it was the finest thing he had ever tasted. Not because of flavor, but because of what came with it.
Recognition.
The acknowledgement that he deserved to exist. They sat together as the moons moved across the broken ceiling. Girl and dragon, neither speaking in words, but both understanding perfectly. Outside, the crystal wastes continued their eternal silence. Inside, something that had been dying began, slowly, to remember how to live. Morning arrived with hesitation, as if uncertain whether the crystal wastes deserved its light. Rosalie woke to find Vesper watching her, his violet eyes clearer than they had been the night before. She had fallen asleep against the temple wall, her cloak wrapped around her like a cocoon. The dragon had moved closer during the night, positioning himself between her and the cold wind that whispered through the ruins. She stretched carefully, mindful of the ancient stone beneath her, and pulled out the last of her provisions. It was not much. A handful of dried berries, some nuts, and a piece of honeycomb wrapped in wax paper. She had been traveling for 3 weeks, searching for the Valley of Whispered Dreams, a place her grandmother swore held the answers to questions Rosalie had not yet learned to ask. Instead, she had found something else entirely. Vesper's stomach rumbled softly, a sound like distant thunder, trying to be polite. Rosalie laughed, the sound bright and unexpected in the gloom. She offered him the honeycomb, and when his long, delicate tongue carefully took it from her palm, she felt the warmth of his breath and the gentle scrape of scales softer than she had imagined. While he ate, she examined the chain around his neck. Celestial iron was rare, forged in fallen stars and cooled in moonlight. It was beautiful and cruel, designed not just to bind but to punish. Each link hummed with suppression magic, dampening his natural abilities, making him weak and vulnerable. She had no tools to break it, no magic strong enough to counter its power, but she had something else. From around her own neck, she removed a small pendant, a silver leaf her grandmother had given her before passing. It was warm against her fingers, always warm. As if holding a memory of summer, Rosalie pressed the leaf against the lock of the chain. She did not know if it would work. She only knew that some gifts were meant to be given away at exactly the right moment. The silver leaf glowed softly, then brightly, then blazed with light so pure it hurt to look at directly. The celestial iron shuddered. The chain began to crack, hairline fractures spreading like rivers across a map. Then, with a sound like bells breaking, it shattered. The pieces fell away, turning to dust before they hit the ground, as if they had never been real at all. Vesper gasped, his whole body shuddering as his magic rushed back into him. His scales rippled, darkening to their true midnight blue, so deep they seemed to hold galaxies. His torn wing flexed experimentally, and though it was still damaged, it no longer hung limp and lifeless. Power coursed through him like water through a dry riverbed. Filling all the empty places, he looked at Rosalie with wonder and something deeper. Something that made her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Before either of them could speak, a new sound shattered the moment. The heavy thud of boots on stone, the clink of weapons, the confident stride of someone who had never learned to doubt themselves. Thorn entered the temple like he owned it. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with hair the color of rust and eyes that assessed value in everything they saw. A dragon hunter by trade, he wore armor made from the scales of his previous kills, each piece a trophy. Each death a story he told at taverns for free drinks. Behind him, 3 others followed. Mercenaries with hungry faces and hands that rested too easily on their weapons. Thorn's eyes found Vesper first, then widened with greedy recognition. A shadow dragon, unchained and recovering. Worth more than 10 years of hunting? His gaze shifted to Rosalie, dismissing her as irrelevant, a mistake he would not live long enough to regret properly. "Well," Thorn said, his voice smooth as poisoned honey, "looks like someone found my merchandise. That dragon was abandoned here for a reason, girl? He is dangerous, unstable, not fit for civilized company." Rosalie stood slowly, placing herself between Thorn and Vesper. She was small compared to the hunter, unarmed, untrained in combat. But her grandmother had taught her something more valuable than fighting. She had taught her how to stand her ground when the ground itself wanted to give way. "He is not merchandise," Rosalie said quietly, her voice steady despite the fear trying to climb up her throat. "He is alive. He has a name, and he does not belong to you." Thorn laughed, and his mercenaries joined in like a chorus that had practiced cruelty. "You think you can stop me? You and that half-dead lizard?" Vesper rose behind Rosalie, his movements fluid despite his injuries. He was weak, yes, but no longer helpless. His shadow magic stirred, responding to his will for the first time in months. Darkness pooled around his feet, not threatening, but present. A reminder that some powers were older than greed. The temperature in the temple dropped. The light dimmed. Vesper's eyes began to glow with inner fire, violet flame that cast strange shadows on the ancient walls. He made a sound, low and resonant, that vibrated in the bones and made the mercenaries take an involuntary step backward. Rosalie felt his magic brush against her mind, gentle as a question. She did not understand how, but she answered anyway, opening something inside herself she had not known was closed. Their thoughts touched, not merging, but aligning, like two instruments finding the same key. Together, they moved as one. Rosalie dove left. Vesper swept his tail right, and suddenly Thorn's confident formation scattered like leaves in a storm. Shadow magic erupted from Vesper in waves, not attacking but confusing, making the mercenaries see things that were not there, fear things that might be. Thorn swung his blade, but Rosalie was already gone, rolling behind a fallen pillar. Vesper's jaws snapped closed inches from the hunter's face, close enough to smell his fear, far enough to prove a point. "I could kill you," the gesture said. "I choose not to." The fight, if it could be called that, lasted less than 3 minutes. When it was over, Thorn and his men were running, stumbling over rubble and their own terror, leaving behind dropped weapons and abandoned courage. Vesper roared after them, not a sound of rage but of dismissal, and the temple walls amplified it until it sounded like the voice of the world itself saying enough. Silence returned. Heavier than before. Rosalie and Vesper looked at each other, both breathing hard, both alive, both changed by what had just happened. She walked to him slowly and placed her hand on his neck where the chain had been. His scales were warm beneath her palm, pulsing with returned vitality. "Thank you," she whispered. Vesper lowered his head until his forehead touched hers. A gesture of intimacy in dragon culture, reserved for family, and something even closer. His thoughts brushed hers again, clearer now, and she heard his voice for the first time, not in her ears, but in the space where thoughts become feelings. The Sky Gardens existed in a place where geography became optional. They floated above the realm of common clouds, anchored to nothing, sustained by magic so old it had forgotten its own origin. Flowers bloomed in colors that had no names, and trees grew with their roots dangling in open air. Drinking from mist and moonlight, Rosalie had heard about this place in stories, the kind told to children to make them dream bigger. She had never imagined she would see it, let alone arrive there on the back of a dragon whose wing was still healing, but whose heart had decided that some destinations were worth the pain. Vesper landed carefully on a meadow of silver grass that chimed softly beneath his weight. His wing trembled from the effort, but his eyes shone with triumph. He had flown. Not far, not perfectly, but he had taken them both above the clouds and into a place where hunters could not follow. Rosalie slid from his back, her legs unsteady from the flight and from the wonder of it all. The air here tasted different, sweeter, like breathing in starlight. She turned to Vesper and found him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. In the week since they had escaped the temple, they had traveled together through forests and over mountains, always moving, always alert for danger. But somewhere between the fear and the flight, something had shifted. She no longer saw a dragon when she looked at him. She saw Vesper. Brave, gentle, patient Vesper, who made her laugh with his terrible attempts at catching fish, and who kept her warm on cold nights with his body, curled protectively around her. And he no longer saw a human. He saw Rosalie. Fierce, kind Rosalie, who sang old songs when she thought he was sleeping, and who had once spent an entire day gathering herbs to make a poultice for his injured wing. Even though it meant going hungry herself, they had become something the old world had no word for, something that existed in the space between species and beyond categories. In the place where souls recognize each other despite the shapes they wear, Vesper shifted, his magic swirling around him like living shadow. When the darkness cleared, he stood before her in a different form. Still himself, but shaped more like her. Tall and lean, with midnight blue skin that seemed to hold the night sky. and those same violet eyes that had first met hers in the temple. His hair was long and dark, shot through with silver-like starlight on water. Dragons could take human shape if they chose, if they were strong enough, if they had reason enough. He had found his reason. Rosalie stared, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. He was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, beautiful in a way that made all her certainties about the world rearrange themselves into new patterns. "Is this better?" Vesper asked, his voice uncertain. Speaking aloud was still strange to him, the words clumsy compared to the elegant simplicity of thought speech. "It is different," Rosalie said carefully. "Then, more honestly, it is still you." She reached out and took his hand. His fingers were longer than hers, his palm warm and rough with the memory of scales. They fit together like a lock finding its key. Like a question meeting its answer, they walked through the sky gardens, hand in hand, discovering wonders. A fountain that flowed upward, defying gravity with cheerful persistence. Trees that grew fruit made of crystallized music which chimed when you bit into them. A pool so clear it reflected not what was, but what could be. When they looked into that pool together, they saw themselves. Not as they were, but as they might become. Two figures standing on a mountain peak, their arms raised to a sky full of dragons and humans living together. The old barriers finally broken, the ancient fears finally overcome. "Is that possible?" Rosalie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was not possible yesterday," Vesper replied, "but yesterday we had not yet met. Today impossible is just a word waiting to be proven wrong." Night fell over the sky gardens, but it was not dark. Stars bloomed like flowers overhead, close enough to touch, singing softly in frequencies that made the heart remember joy. Vesper and Rosalie sat together on the silver grass, her head resting against his shoulder, his arm around her waist. "I love you," she said, simply, "because some truths are too big to dress up in fancy words." Vesper turned to her, and his eyes held galaxies. "In my language, we have a word. Shalreth. It means the one who teaches your soul to sing. You are my Shalreth, Rosalie. You are the song I did not know I was supposed to sing." She kissed him then, and it was not strange or wrong or impossible. It was right in a way that made the stars above sing louder, in a way that made the magic of the sky gardens pulse with approval, in a way that made the universe itself pause and smile when they finally pulled apart. Both breathless and amazed, Vesper's form shimmered. For a moment he was dragon again, magnificent and powerful, his wings spread wide. Then he was human-shaped once more, then something in between, flowing from one to another, as easily as water changing shape. "I can be whatever I need to be," he said. "But with you, I can finally just be me." They stayed in the sky gardens for a time, healing and growing stronger. Vesper's wing mended properly, the torn membrane knitting itself back together. Rosalie learned to hear the language of dragons, not with her ears but with her heart. They practiced flying together, her on his back, both of them laughing when he dipped too fast or climbed too high, and slowly they began to plan. The world below was still divided, still full of fear and misunderstanding, but they had each other, and they had proof that love could cross any boundary. They would go back down, eventually. They would show others what they had learned, that dragons and humans were not so different after all, that chains could be broken, that the forgotten could be found, that love, real love, did not care about scales or skin, wings or hands. It only cared about the heart that beat beneath, and the soul that sang its answer on their last night in the sky gardens, before they would descend to begin their real journey. Rosalie and Vesper stood at the edge of a cloud, looking down at the world spread below them, like a map of possibility. "Ready?" she asked. "With you," Vesper replied, taking her hand. "I am ready for anything," and together. They stepped off the edge and flew, not away from the world, but toward it, carrying with them a story that would change everything.